ever to begin with. And so although it's frustrating to see, just how ill prepared we were to deal with these types of things because of the regulations we had, I do have hope that people are learning these lessons. They're understanding, how when we break down these barriers to innovation and we just let people serve patients and serve the public in ways that make sense, that can really help respond to a crisis. And that if it is useful in an emergency, then it's useful in times of peace as well.
Yeah, I think that there has been a teachable moment, shall we say, for the past 6 months. And we tried to capture this a little bit in My Name is Coronavirus, a Draw My Life that we released early on, in which we talked about the CDC and how if it was just supposed to do one thing, right, it was not able to do it because the choice of doing one thing is the choice to not do another thing. And rather than doing the one thing that they should have been doing, they were going after vaping, they were talking about, gun control, all of this stuff. And they were completely unprepared to do the one thing that they should have done. And they already seem pretty lame the way they've been handling it recently. So I want to remind everybody who's watching, we have this extraordinary opportunity with Christina Sandefur. So type in your questions, type them into Zoom, type them onto Facebook, and I definitely want to get to your questions because I bet they're even smarter than mine. But I couldn't go one moment further, Christina. I have to ask you about the art, and I have to ask you about the tattoo.
Yes. Well, my entire office, which I won't make people seasick by turning the camera around, but is all Art Deco themed. I have been an admirer of Ayn Rand since I was very young. And, her philosophy and the philosophy of objectivism is really the reason that I'm here today doing the job that I'm doing. And so this, of course, is the oath from Atlas Shrugged, and it's something that I live by every single day. Fall short of it sometimes, but always look at it every day that I enter my office. So as you said, this is not staged. This is actually hanging in the corner of my office here at the Goldwater Institute, and I look at it every day and remind myself to live by that, which is why I also got the tattoo that I have. I have a tattoo of a $sign on my foot, and of course, it's the correct $sign from Atlas Shrugged that has the 2 lines instead of just the one, just like your beautiful pin. And I wanted one for a long time because I thought, for me, and especially, gosh, who would have even thought it would get harder and harder like it has today? But I thought, I want to wear my fundamental beliefs on my sleeve or on my foot, if you will. I want to always be a spokesperson for, values of individualism and capitalism and freedom. And so I said, I'm just going to get a tattoo that shows that I believe in free market capitalism. So that way I will never be able to hide it, and I will always be encouraged to promote it. And so I was visiting my family in Hawaii, and I had a little bit of downtime. I said, hey, I'm gonna go get this tattoo. And so I go into this tattoo shop, just found the artist that was available, told her what I wanted, and kind of explained how it was important that it looked a certain way. And she said, oh, does it symbolize something? Because I have the same $sign. And she showed me on her arm, and she had a whole sleeve of different tattoos, but she had the same one. And I said, oh, that's funny. That's exactly what I want. And the tattoo artist said, well, there's this book, Atlas Shrugged. And I thought, and come to find out, she was an objectivist. Who would have thought? I would walk into a tattoo shop and the tattoo artist in Hawaii would be an objectivist. So it's even more special now.
Oh, well, I don't know if you'd still have her contact information, but that would be a lot of fun. We should do something with objectivist tattoos and Ayn Rand tattoos, because I'm sure there's quite a bit out there. So from all over the world. Okay, so speaking of all over the world, when you look around comparing to the United States to what other nations are doing in terms of regulations and speeding treatments and vaccines, how do we compare, and what can we do to make sure that we are in a competitive place when it comes to the race for these kinds of cures and vaccines?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I think is especially important today because we do see some desire, some advocacy to sort of turn inward, right, in light of the pandemic. And oh gosh, some people have drawn the have drawn the conclusion that, well, we're too reliant on countries like China, we're too reliant on foreign countries, and we need to bring everything back home. And I think that the answer is exactly the opposite. We should have more reliance on more people in countries that, can develop, say, vaccines or treatments. The COVID vaccine, there's no guarantee that it's going to come from the United States. And what we need to do is be open and able to trade freely and to access those things freely so that American patients and American doctors can get access in the same way that patients and doctors would in other countries. The truth is, we talk a lot about how burdensome the FDA is, and it truly is. But the US mostly still leads the world in treatment innovation. But it is changing. You see a lot of developed nations. Japan is a great example that has really broken down a lot of unnecessary red tape because they know it just doesn't make sense for the way that the treatments of the future look. And so in Japan, I was talking about this lengthy multi-decades process to get access to a life-saving treatment here in the United States. In the United States, our process says, okay, you first have to prove that it's safe. And, I think most people, if they're going to accept some government regulation, they can say, all right, well, we at least want to know the drug's not, the treatment's not going to kill us. It's not going to be very dangerous. But then the bulk of that time in the US is then spent proving that the drug is effective. And, what does that mean, right? I mean, is a drug, every drug is going to be different for every individual and every individual circumstance. There is no way that you could ever prove that a drug is 100% effective, and there's no drug out there that is. In fact, there's no drug out there that is completely safe. Even Tylenol kills hundreds of people a year, acetaminophen, right? So it's going to be some bureaucratic line drawing, and of course, without proper knowledge and incentives about what risks tolerance individuals have, the FDA just draws that line where they think it makes sense. And that's why drug companies have to test for years and years and years and years to prove the level of efficacy that meets the bureaucratic standard. In Japan, they have sped the process along. So they've said for certain treatments, once you show that the treatment is safe and effective enough in certain groups, you can start giving people access to that treatment. It's sort of like a provisional approval. They'll keep testing it. And if later on we find, gosh, there's some big safety concern, or gosh, this really just doesn't work for a whole segment of the population, then they might pull back approval, or they might add additional labeling and things like that. But in the meantime, why should people who are dying or really sick be deprived access to that medication if we know it's on the right track? So the US has fallen behind in this way. Right to Try is a great step in the right direction because it does give individual patients who are terminal the ability to bypass some of that. But the United States really is not on track to compete with systems like Japan. And so what we're sort of advocating for here in the US is, well, one, we need to reform our system, but two, this idea of international reciprocity, right? Something might move along a lot faster in Japan and get approved quicker, or a company might decide to go through the regulatory process first in France or in the United Kingdom. And the sad reality is that once they put all the money and time into doing that testing and get approval in those countries, they have to, if they want approval in the US, they have to do the same thing in the US all over again, even though the numbers and the data and the science don't change from country to country. So our argument is, look, countries that have similar or better standards than ours, if a drug is approved in Japan or approved in the United Kingdom, approved in France, whatever, it should be presumed to be approved in the United States unless our drug regulators have a really, really good reason to justify why it shouldn't be. The presumption should be that doctors and patients should be able to work with those treatments. And that would really stop a lot of what we see. You mentioned the patients that I've met. One who really touched me was a young man who was 10 years old and diagnosed with osteosarcoma, which is a rare form of bone cancer. And it was, it could have been a death sentence for him. There was a treatment out there that was highly effective that his doctor thought would work for him, but it wasn't approved yet in the US, still working its way through the process. It was approved in the UK. His family had means. They had they were able to pick up and move. They had to move to Europe for an entire year for him to get this treatment. Pull him out of school. His dad had to commute from Europe to Arizona for work. But he got the treatment. He got better. He's alive and well today. He actually interned at the Goldwater Institute to help us with Right to Try. But, you know, what he said is, I'm lucky because my parents had the money and the ability to be able to do that. But it's crazy to think that, you know, that treatment, which has been approved in other countries for years, is still not approved here in the United States. And there's no reason for that. So again, breaking down these artificial barriers when it comes to science, when it comes to standards, you know, there's no reason why those things should have to stop at our border. And we should be able to bring those treatments into the United States and take them in the United States if they're approved somewhere like Europe, like Japan.
Yeah, that is amazing. So that it seems is possibly the next frontier, right? To get this reciprocity going. And I think it would be spectacular in terms of saving lives and also expanding cures, right? Because then people can devote, these companies can devote more resources, right, to hiring the best minds, to developing the best cures, rather than to all of the regulatory rigmarole. I mean, people love to demonize big pharma, but like who other than big pharma, you know, can afford to possibly go through these kinds of processes? So we are limiting ourselves as Americans in terms of the kinds of innovation that we could be bringing to bear by these excess innovations. All right, so we are going to get to some of these questions. Roy, hey Roy Miller is here, and he's asking, kind of got a little bit to that, what people or documents do you look to for moral guidance?
Yeah, well, I personally, like I said, I'm a great admirer of Ayn Rand's. I think her system of morality is the right one. It's the one that I look to when I think about not only how I should live my life, but how government should act. And the truth of the matter is, you know, we see a lot of these regulatory agencies. We're talking a lot about healthcare. So like, let's look at the FDA. You know, to the extent that we think an FDA should exist, it should be more like the FDA of the past that said, well, let's make sure patients have all the information they need to make the decisions with their doctors. And instead, no, today we have an FDA that says, we don't trust you to make a decision. You know, the debates that were going on around Right to Try when we were working on it, we had these bioethicists that claimed that they were representing the right morality. And they said, no, we can't trust desperate dying patients to make decisions about treatments. They're too desperate. They're going to make bad decisions. We need a neutral arbiter like the government to come in and tell them whether they should have access or not. And so again, when you look at when that's your philosophy of morality, that an individual's, you know, values and individuals' risk benefit tolerance and individuals' control over their own body and their own well-being, when those things are irrelevant, or when those things are subsumed to what some sort of, you know, government bureaucrat thinks is best for the collective, it's to me, that is the very definition of immorality. And so, you know, again, I think Rand's works guide a lot of it. I think, you know, the foundation of our country, I mean, our Declaration of Independence is a manifestation of that, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is the pursuit. It is the ability to choose. It is not a guarantee that something will work. No one can guarantee that. No government could guarantee that. But the right to be able to pursue the life that you want to live, I mean, that is what makes life worth living. That is a guiding philosophy for me and a guiding document for me, because that is what makes people human. That is, you know, the ability to not just survive, but to thrive. And we can't do that if we don't have self-agency and if we aren't allowed to make decisions for ourselves.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think the other thing is when government acts in a way that is communicating that they don't trust individuals, it is actually degrading trust in society. Because if the leading institution is telling citizens that they can't be trusted, then, you know, people are also getting the message, well, how can I trust somebody else? Like how can we trust each other? And trust is essential to any kind of collaboration and a functioning economy.
No, you're so right about that. And it's amazing because we hear a lot today the mostly false notion that, oh, things are so dangerous today and we're so unsafe today, which is just not true. I mean, by almost any standard, we are safer today, however you want to define that, than we ever have been. And a big part of that, of course, is because we're able to trust each other, and we're able to trust each other in a big way because of markets. Of course, trust helps markets function, but it's also markets that helps us. One of the great examples of that to me is ride sharing, right? Uber, Lyft. If you think back to 10 years ago, I mean, could you even fathom standing on a street corner in downtown Manhattan and getting in a stranger's car, somebody that you've never seen before, somebody who doesn't have any connection to you, just getting in there and telling them, hey, take me up to Central Park. I mean, where am I going to end up? I don't know, especially if I don't know the area, right? And yet today we don't even think twice about it. And it's incredibly safe to use Uber and Lyft. And the reason why is because of the market, and because Uber and Lyft found a way around these crazy regulations. And some would arguably say that it's safer to use services like that than traditional taxi services, which are more regulated. And so, yeah, it's incredibly important. And government didn't do that. Government didn't instill that trust. Like you say, if anything, its regulations have sort of degraded that trust. But it's markets, it's freedom, it's our ability to find solutions.
I that resonates with me about Uber, because when I took this job running the Atlas Society, and I was like, oh, salary is $5. Okay, $5. How am I going to pay the bills? Then I said, well, I'm going to do Airbnb. And people think I'm completely insane, that like I would let strangers stay in my guest room. But there's a trust that is engendered by people using the platform and knowing that there are consequences, right? When there are no consequences, then people are less likely to act in ways that are in their long-term self-interest. And it's also, in terms of trust, why I think communication is important. That's a value that we emphasize, at the Atlas Society in our particular branch of open objectivism, which is that, talk to each other. I'm not going to get like infected by talking to somebody, who is a conservative or a liberal or has a different view of objectivism. It's just like, can't we just talk? I mean, it's not that difficult, folks. I don't know why it's that difficult. All right, but this one is difficult. This question is a toughie. So if you don't want it, we could go on to another. Richard Horton asks, hey, Christina, what are your thoughts about individual rights and genetic engineering? So
yeah, it's a really, really interesting one. And there are a lot of libertarians, objectivists, conservatives, whatever, that are kind of on both sides of this issue. I tend to be, I think for the reasons that we were just discussing, this dovetails kind of nicely. I tend to be more trusting of technologies like that. And I think that obviously consent plays a big role, just like it does in any other area. But I think that, genetic testing, genetic engineering can be a tool for good. It can be it can be a really, really interesting way to be able to get rid of diseases, to be able to, we talk about it in the terms of food, right? When people are very averse to GMO, we want labels on things that say, oh, our food is not GMO, which to me is just crazy in a world where, if we know one thing, we know that we don't have unlimited resources, right? Scarcity exists. How can we help more people eat? Well, we look for ways to better produce food. So why wouldn't we want to genetically engineer food to be able to get safe, healthy, food to more people? So I think, it's obviously a big can of worms. There's a lot of implications there for human genetic experiments. Obviously, tools and technology can be used for bad as well as good. But I think the answer to all of these things, just like, the Ubers and the Lyfts of today and any other technological innovation, is that we should be open to it, and that we should give people the freedom to be able to try these things. But again, there are areas where, privacy concerns and things like that come into play. And, it does become difficult to grapple with. So just like anything else, there's going to be limits where my exercise of, my individual rights starts to affect yours, then I no longer have a right. I'm coercing you. And so drawing those lines can sometimes be tricky in a modern world. But I think it's wrong to just completely close ourselves off to a technological innovation just because we can't foresee exactly how that would work out, or just because, our founding fathers, when they wrote the Constitution, didn't foresee those types of things.
Okay, this is another, I think, kind of challenging question, and you may not have an opinion on it. I don't have much of an opinion on it. The question is from Vicky. She asks, what are your thoughts on the politicization of hydrochloroquine as a COVID treatment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've thought about it a lot because of Right to Try and because of the work that we do in healthcare. I will say, my thought is that it's a shame that it's been politicized. I am not making any statement about, chloroquine or hydrochloroquine and whether it is an effective treatment for COVID-19. I'm not a doctor. I don't know. There is definitely a lot of anecdotal evidence out there from doctors who have used it to treat that say that it's been helpful in certain circumstances. I cannot verify that. What I can say, though, is chloroquine is a great example of exactly why we should avoid politicizing the practice of medicine, right? This is a treatment that has been around for a very long time. It's used to treat multiple illnesses. One of them is rheumatoid arthritis, and it's been used safely for RA for years. And so, but all of a sudden, it's proposed as a potential treatment for COVID-19, and the president comes out and starts talking about it. Now, in one way, you can say, well, gosh, he didn't just talk about it as a potential treatment. He was basically endorsing it. And of course, no president should be doing that. But of course, it's also toxic once President Trump, says he likes something, then 50% of Americans think it's horrible. And so all of a sudden, then we have states stepping up and telling doctors that they can't treat people who have COVID with chloroquine, even though chloroquine is an approved drug. It's been approved for decades. It is, again, no drug is perfect or safe in every situation, but it's a relatively safe drug. And doctors have the legal authority to use a treatment in a ways that we call off-label. So if a drug is approved to treat RA, a doctor, using his or her medical judgment, can use that treatment to treat COVID or something else. But all of a sudden, states are stepping up and governors are issuing executive orders telling doctors that they can't use chloroquine for COVID. And it's just, it's crazy because politicians shouldn't be practicing medicine unless they are also doctors, and then they should be doing that with their patients. and so I think the lesson we can learn from chloroquine is exactly what happens when something like this gets politicized. What we should do, chloroquine's approved, right? And it can be used off label. We should study it. We should allow doctors. I mean, there are doctors, look, red and blue don't really matter in an emergency situation in a hospital, right? And there were doctors all over this country that thought that this could be an effective treatment for certain patients. Now, they're not always going to be right, but these are people who are trained medical professionals who are on both sides of the political aisle or completely apolitical, using this in a scientific fashion. Neither President Trump nor the governor of Nevada nor any other politician should be telling them one way or another, should be second guessing their medical judgment in that way.
I completely agree. So everybody, we've got another 20 minutes or so, so we still have time for a few of your questions. So go ahead and hit us on up. Erasmo Martinez asks, what would be the role of government in a libertarian society? Well, I think Ayn Rand had a pretty good answer to that.
We have about 24 hours to discuss.
Yeah, right.
I mean, obviously that's a, it's a big question, and there's a lot of good answers to that question. The short of it is that in a libertarian society, a government would exist to, for protection, and primarily the protection of people's rights. Right now, again, that can mean a whole lot of things to a whole lot of people. I think our Constitution is imperfect, but I think it does a pretty decent job of outlining the very limited, and this is again the way it's written, not the way it's been expanded and interpreted, but the very limited functions of government. But libertarians and objectivists believe that there is a role for government, but the role is to secure rights. And this is, of course, what our Declaration of Independence says. And this is why it's so important to read our Constitution and to think about government in the United States in light of the Declaration of Independence, because the Declaration says, look, the purpose of government is to protect people's rights. It doesn't pre-exist people's rights. It doesn't float out there in some state of nature. We get together and form government and give it very limited power so that our rights can be protected. And so, a government, so again, if we look in terms of the FDA, like I said, an FDA that, that makes sure, like we hear a lot about the snake oil salesman, right? This comes because people think, you were mentioning big pharma, people think, gosh, if you have a lot of money, if you're a company with a lot of money, you probably got that in some evil way, right? And you're greedy. You don't need all that money. And of course, when people follow the market, the way that you get money in a free market is I can't, steal it from you. I have to, because government's there to stop that. And I don't have a right to do that. I have to convince you to give me my money, to give me your money. And to convince you to do that, I have to give you something that you want or need. And that's how companies get money. And so, the FDA should, there are already so many standards in place in a market system to make sure that that's how drug companies work, that's how medical treatment works. So, you would see a government role in healthcare to be more akin to punishing people who lie, right? So the snake oil salesman can't operate because he's lying. He's telling you that, this product here is going to cure everything, and it really cures nothing. And so, the government comes in and punishes that person for lying. But at the end of the day, if people are trading truthful information about products and services, and you have doctors who are medical professionals that know how to interpret that information and work with patients, that's where the government's role stops. The government shouldn't be telling people, whether or not they want to take certain risks, because that's really what Right to Try and a lot of these healthcare initiatives are about, is that the government thinks that you are not equipped to be able to make decisions about your own healthcare when those decisions aren't scientific and they're not medical decisions. They're about your risk tolerance. I may be dying and think, look, this is a long shot, but I'm dying. So I want to try that treatment in case it can help me. And I want to know I had the right to make that choice. Other people might say, you know what, I'm sick. I've been through a lot. I've been through a lot of medical treatments. I'm tired. I'm just done. I'm done fighting. Who's to say which one is right and which one is wrong? That is not the government's role. And that is not the government's role in a libertarian society. The government has no role in that decision making.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Erasmo, going back to Ayn Rand, and we meme this relentlessly. She said the government has 3 functions. 1 is police, to protect individuals against criminals. 2 is national defense, to protect the country against foreign invasion. And 3 is the courts, to adjudicate differences and to punish criminals. So that is really what should be the role of the government in a free market society. And, Christina, what you were saying really resonated with me too, because I spent a good chunk of my career in the private sector. I was a senior vice president at Dole Food Company. I started their Nutrition Institute. And this was a time when the FDA was getting increasingly aggressive about what we could put on food, packaging. And I remember, because the owner of Dole Food Company, I think he's about 100 now, but he was just passionate about health and nutrition. And that's what he wanted to do with his property, which was his company, was he wanted to sell fruits and vegetables, but also he wanted to communicate messages about nutrition, let people know what kinds of nutrients were in different foods, why those nutrients were important. And we got just like incredible interference from the FDA. And I was like, shouldn't you guys don't you have another job to do? And it was just an example, sort of like what you saw with the CDC, where there was this mission creep, but it was also more than that. It was just that there was this incredible mistrust of anybody in private business.
Yeah.
So they just thought like, okay, well, whether it's, you're selling snake oil here or you're selling fruits and vegetables there, if you're selling, you must be somehow doing something wrong.
So true. Well, and here's what's so crazy about that. If you're selling, I mean, really, even the snake oil salesman, even without government, he's eventually going to be found out, right? I mean,
right.
Because if you keep selling snake oil and people keep taking it and it doesn't work, eventually people are going to get angry. And that is especially true in today's society where, oh my gosh, I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't buy anything on Amazon or anywhere else without reading reviews, right? Everything you want to know about that product, anything people want to say about it, you can find online. You've got Consumer Reports, you've got Yelp, for restaurants. I mean, we self-regulate all the time. And if that person, if that snake oil salesman, sells a product that doesn't work, he's going to go out of business. The thing that's hilarious though, is that the FDA, if they fail, and they fail all the time. I mean, the government agencies have failed during COVID. Government, I mean, the FDA approves so many treatments that eventually they end up pulling back on because they say they don't work or because there's, health concerns, and the FDA fails to approve how many treatments that could have saved countless lives or takes 10, 15 years to approve something and how many people had to die in the interim. And you know what? Those are failures. If business did that, I mean, they would go out of business. But when the FDA screws up, they get more money. It's like the opposite of a market, right? They go to the Congress and they say, well, we just we can't act fast enough. All these treatments are out there. We just don't have enough people at the FDA to help approve them. And so we got it wrong. We need more scientists. We need more bureaucrats. We need whatever. And they get a bigger budget. They get rewarded for failing, which is exactly the opposite of what happens in the market.
So true. I remember early on, one of the first times I ever went on television, I was scared out of my mind. I really didn't have all the answers down, and a question came out of nowhere. It was sort of like, well, there's been, car accidents. So I think we need to have more government regulation to make sure that these cars are safe and to make sure that unsafe cars aren't on the road. And I just, like, without being even that sophisticated, not that I am now, I just said, I think the car makers probably have a very big incentive to have safe cars and put those, procedures for quality control in place, because one car with one malfunction, no one's going to want to buy the car. So. All right, so let's see. We got another interesting question. Victor Snyder. This is interesting, a little off topic, but I would love to know your thought. He wants to know, how would you react to an immoral law? Should a person obey it? Like, so I guess an example could be, like, let's say there's a law, you can't take this kind of drug because it hasn't been approved. Depends on it, or your life could depend on it.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one we sort of had to grapple with a little bit in the early days of Right to Try, to use it as an example. So we actually started Right to Try at the state level, and the reason for that was primarily strategic, because people have been trying to reform the FDA from Washington, D.C. for decades, and they were getting nowhere because Washington, D.C. is where good ideas go to die. So, we started at the state level, where you can get just a little bit closer to the people. And of course, it was more of a grassroots movement. Now, when Right to Try laws were passed, so say, for example, Texas, that's an example. Texas passed the Right to Try Act. Technically, that conflicted with federal law because the FDA was still saying you can't have these treatments unless we tell you you can. And our argument was both constitutional and moral. On the Constitution side, we said, well, we actually don't think that federal law trumps state law here because we don't think the federal government has the power to tell dying patients that they can't take these treatments in the first place. So that was our legal argument. But on the moral side, we said, look, there was a doctor in Texas, and he treated for neuroendocrine cancer. Up until this new treatment came out and was going through the approval process, the best thing he could do is give people chemotherapy, and people had awful side effects. And most people who were diagnosed with this particular type of neuroendocrine cancer were told that they were going to be dead within months. But this new treatment was showing remarkable success. People were living for years. There are still people alive today who got treatments from him under right to try 5 years ago. But the federal government said it wasn't approved yet and he couldn't take it. And he believed, and I agree with him, that that's immoral. Like, that's the government basically giving those people a death sentence. And that is not only unconstitutional, but it is morally wrong. So that doctor said, I want to treat these patients. And we said, absolutely. And actually we said we would represent him in court if if the FDA were to come after him. And interestingly enough, they didn't, because he was not, he was protected by state law, but he was technically breaking federal law. And we actually kind of expected, I'm an attorney, so I was kind of rearing to have that not only legal fight in the court, but that fight over the morality or the immorality of the law in the court of public opinion. And we didn't ever get there. And I think part of that is, even though the FDA is very jealous of its power, it does not like being undermined. And even though, it had federal law on its side, at least statutory law, I think the moral argument made a big difference, because, we heard behind the scenes a lot from federal officials that really hated right to try. I mean, the FDA would even go into state legislatures and try to get these state legislators not to pass the law. But out in public, they were very quiet about it. And because I think because it's just, how can you make the argument that dying patients shouldn't have that right, especially when these are treatments that are being given to people in clinical trials, right? Why? That's basically like the government saying it's moral for me to pick winners or losers. And that is what the government does, but you couldn't even get bureaucrats to say it. So I think there's something to be said for standing up to an immoral law and ignoring it. I mean, juries do that with jury nullification. And I think that morality and constitutionality really overlap a lot too, because I think when you look at what the Constitution actually says about our rights and actually says about government's powers, a lot of the things that we find to be immoral that government does are actually also unconstitutional.
Yeah, well, think back to the civil rights movement, think back to Rosa Parks, that she was not willing to obey an immoral law. So, I think that there are times when actually refusing to submit is the right thing to do, but you have to be careful. I also want to applaud Christina for one of the correct uses of the word jealous. That is like one of my pet peeves, when people say that envy, and jealousy are the same. They are not. Envy is, Ayn Rand called it hatred of the good for being good, but you can also think of it in common parlance as kind of a wanting what someone else has, whereas jealousy is being fearful of losing what you have. And jealousy is not always, a bad thing. Sometimes it is good to want to keep what you have.
In
terms of government.
I'm so glad. I mean, I applaud you for applauding the use of it, because it really is, though. We can joke about these things, but it's very serious. Obviously, Rand believed, very much in the power of using language correctly, and that's why, she insisted on using the word selfish, and we hear it just misused and abused constantly today. But whether you talk about selfishness or rational self-interest or however you want to say it, but it's important for people to understand that words mean something, and we can't be lazy with language, because if we're lazy with language, we lose the ability to reason.
Exactly. I think that is so important. That's something that I have also written about, because particularly now with all of these politically correct terms, if we control language, we limit language, then we are limiting our ability to even think about issues. I wrote about this in an article I did called Vagrants in Our Driveway, a Teachable Moment. And one of the things that I talked about was how we used to have a kind of rich, not always very polite language to describe people who were living, you know, on the streets. And now it's just consistently, we'd say homelessness, like that you don't have a home. And so then we tend to, because we use that word, we tend to think about things in terms of policy solutions or what is going on here as a housing crisis when, you know, in fact, you might have different kinds of issues going on. So, but this one is near and dear to my heart. Okay, we are running out of time. Let's see. Here's a quick one, kind of random. Jeff Rembolt, have you seen 1986, The Act movie?
I have not, no. Have you?
I have not either. Jeff, let us know what it is about.
I'm gonna go as soon as we're done.
Okay, and then here's this one probably again might also take too long to answer in the remaining few minutes that we have, but we have a question from Mark Smith, who wanted to know, is libertarian equated to emotional maturity? Is this any kind of recognized connection? Mark, have you been to Freedom Fest ever? I don't know.
That's a great response. Yeah. Well, I'm not a, you know, a sociologist or anything like that. I would not be able to point you to literature about these things, but I will say this. Look, I mean, again, kind of joking aside, there is a maturity in libertarianism or in embracing a philosophy like that, because, you know, it's a philosophy that respects another person and, you know, that person's decisions. And it's also it's a philosophy that says that in order to get your respect or to get your money or to get your goods or you know, to get you to join a group and associate with me, I have to earn it. I can't use force, and I have to use persuasion, and I have to create things that will be useful to you and that you will accept, so that we're able to work together. And so, you know, that to me, I mean, that is maturity, right? Children, I mean, even most children understand that to an extent, but immature people, children, you know, they're the ones that, you know, that want to use brute force to be able to take things from others or to be able to control their people's lives. And, you know, mature people, they operate more like libertarians.
Yeah, I think, and actually, Mark, you know, that would be a great question. Check our upcoming events calendar on Facebook and on the Atlas Society site. We have one of my other favorite ladies coming up as a guest, Dr. Helen Fisher. I don't know if she's fully made the transition to being a libertarian, but she is a psychologist, and she's done incredible research on different political points of view and the different kinds of personalities that line up with that. So so that would be a good question for her. Also, everybody, if you haven't gotten enough of the most fabulous state, Arizona, and Ayn Rand fans from Arizona, I want you to come back next week as well. I have one of my oldest friends joining us, Clint Bullock, who I know is also a good friend of Christina's, and he is going to share with us also his Ayn Rand origin story. So sorry.
His tattoo. Don't forget, he has a Liberty tattoo as well with a great story. So don't forget.
Okay, you know, Christina, I think you might know him a little better than I do. Although it's been a while. It's been a while. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. And I am definitely going to hit him up with that. Everybody, please check out Christina's amazing work. Please support her work, support the Goldwater Institute. If you like what we're doing at the Atlas Society, remember, we did not take bailout money. So, you know, any small donation support, we really appreciate it. And thank you for making it possible for us to do these. They are like the total highlight of my week. Christina, this one was off the charts. I'm so grateful, and just thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for the work that you do. It's so important.
And to you, it was just excellent conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Okay, thanks, Christina. Bye, everybody.